Okay, let's bring the meeting to order, please.
All right, I'll sit down,
Everybody will shut up except Smith. Hi, Chris.
I don't think Whitey will make it.
Okay, we all settled in? Can I have roll call, please?
Matt Conant,
Present.
Bruce Johnson,
Here.
Bill Conley,
Here.
Bo Shepherd, Sean Harris, Wade Kirchner,
Here.
Charlie Hoppin,
Yes.
Drew Stresser, Lac Vergog,
Yes.
Mike Morris,
Yes.
and Chris Schmidl.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've asked Bo Shepherd if he would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Okay, public comment. Members of the public will be allowed to address the Cedar Buttes Flood Control Agency's Board of Directors on items of interest to the public that are within subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Any member of the audience who may wish to bring a matter before the board that has not been placed on the agenda to do so at this time. However, state law provides that no action may be taken on any item not appearing on the posted agenda. Do we have nothing from the public? Okay. Thank you. Consent calendar. The consent calendar groups together those items which are considered non-controversial or for which prior policy direction has been given to staff and that require only routine action by the board. The chair will advise the audience that the matters may be adopted in total by one motion. However, the board may, at its option or upon request of a member of the public, consider any matters separately.
Move to approve consent.
Second. 1 through 7.
I have a motion by Director Gag and and a second by Director Morris. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those against? Ayes have it. Informational and possible approval items. Number 8, Cedar Butte Basin Regional Levee Improvement Program Levee Development Impact Fee Nexus Study and Collection Agreement Approval.
Mr. Chairman, our budget manager, Seth Warzel, is going to give this presentation. Just real briefly, this is a follow-up to an item that was brought to the board in, I believe, late 2021. And at that time, the board approved the draft Nexus study and authorized staff to go out and start meeting with our member land use agencies. And we did that, and we've gotten some comments back on the Nexus study, and at this time, we're bringing it back to the board for consideration of approval. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Seth to walk you through the details.
Thank you, Michael. So just to summarize, the recommendation today has two parts. The first is to adopt a resolution approving the Nexus study as a template for use by the member land use jurisdictions for their approval to impose the fee. The second part of the recommendation is to delegate authority to the executive director to execute a collection agreement with the counties and the cities, member agencies, to collect the fee and remit the revenues collected back to Cedar Butte for use in implementing the projects that are described in the Nexus study. Just by way of background, the Nexus study is structured around our strategic plan. Our charge was to implement an urban level of flood protection in the north and a rural 100-year protection in the southern portion of the basin, in the rural southern portion of the basin. That's reflected in both our strategic plan and the assessment district engineers report. That's the goal of the agency. Up until June of 2021, Yuba City and Sutter County had a development impact fee to fund levee improvements. They since rescinded that fee And we've coordinated with the city to transmit a portion of the revenues collected. They use some of the revenues to advance their compliance with urban level of flood protection from a land use perspective. The other fees were transferred to Sutter Butte to advance our charge. When Yuba City rescinded that fee, they did it in the context of, I'm sorry, that should have been 2021, a typo there, in June of 2021. When they rescinded that, they did that with the understanding that Sbfca was going to implement a regional fee that worked in concert with the rest of our funding program. So I'll describe that a little bit more later on in the presentation. Wanted to start off by just emphasizing why it's important that we have a development impact fee. In order to complete our charge, 200-year protection in the northern portion of the basin and 100-year protection in the southern portion of the basin, we need additional funding. We've constructed a significant portion of the levees, as the board knows, and certified these levees per state and federal standards. But new development is benefiting from that, and as they were paying in Yuba City to develop and buy into the improvements, then we need that to continue to happen in order to be able to complete our charge. Further, future work that's included in our charge to ensure that we maintain that 200-year level of protection valid through ongoing certifications, we need to complete additional work to do that. So if we stop maintaining that certification, then future growth in the urban portion of the basin could be in jeopardy if those certifications lapse, if portions of the basin get mapped as a special flood hazard area. So that's part of what the improvements that would be funded from this fee is, to maintain that certification into the future in the areas of the portion of the basin where development would occur and be paying this fee. So the concept, as I alluded to, is that the fee would cover the entire Sutter Butte Basin and consider the full scope of Sbfca's flood risk reduction program. So all the improvements necessary to meet Sbfca's charge and maintain the benefits of the improvements that have been constructed thus far. The fee is based on an analysis of planned development. This is a bit where it differed from the original fee that Yuba City was collecting, but we did an analysis of what planned development would take place in the basin based on land use agency general plans and development information obtained directly from the community development departments within the counties and the 4 cities. Further, the fee would work in conjunction with all the funding received by Sutter Butte. Previously, the fee that Yuba City had didn't consider the existence of the assessment district or the significant amount of grant funding that we've received. So the financing plan and the costs that are included in the Nexus study reflect those other funding mechanisms, including mainly the assessment district and current grants. We've also made assumptions about future grants based on our historical cost sharing that we've achieved from our cost sharing partners. So this is the boundary where the fee would be collected by all the land use agencies in the Sutter Butte Basin. Again, the 2 counties and the 4 cities. The fee would be the same across the entire basin as proposed. There are 2 statutes that govern how the development impact fees can be imposed. The first one is that I'll go over is AB 602. This is a more recent legislation that was passed, and part of it went effective in July 21. Other portions of it went effective in January of 2022. When we presented the fee in October of 21, as Michael mentioned previously, that the board considered, we needed to update the Nexus study to reflect this new legislation. The Nexus study defines what the existing levels and new levels of service would be pre and post the fee. Obviously, it's reflective of our strategic plan. The new level of service is 200-year protection in the north and 100-year protection in the south. The fees need to be charged on a per square foot basis. Essentially, this legislation was advanced by housing advocates. They took exception to cities and jurisdictions that charged fee on a per unit basis, where say a 500 square foot house in the extreme as compared to a 5,000 square foot house had the same fee. They didn't think that was appropriate, and they advanced this legislation that required that fees be charged on a per square foot basis or provide a justification as an exemption. Our fee is proposed to be charged on a per square foot basis. And so we comply with that requirement. Further, the AB 602 requires certain procedural requirements for the adoption of the fee. You have to have a 30-day notice public hearing prior to the adoption of the Nexus study. Our proposal is to help facilitate that noticing process with each of the member land use agency jurisdictions as part of their adoption process. So we would help them work through that, that noticing requirement. They also have a 14-day mail notice requirement to any interested party that has a request in that they be notified if there are new or changed fees. A lot of the building industry association presumably would, has that type of request in with any jurisdiction so that they can keep an eye on what's going on in terms of impact fees. The other requirement that you need to comply with, that has been around for a long time, is AB 1600, also known as the Mitigation Fee Act. This is where the requirements for the Nexus study are defined. So you have to identify the purpose of the fee and its use. But the big thing here is that you determine the relationship between the impact and the type of land use that is subject to the fee. So this is where you essentially equivocate the fee for residential land uses versus commercial land uses versus industrial land uses. That's the bulk of the Nexus study. We developed an approach for determining that proportionality of impact, and that's how we determine what the fee rates are based on the land use types. Happy to answer any questions. I wasn't planning on getting into the nuts and bolts of the Nexus study, but that's why the document's 60, 70 pages long, is it goes into those details.
Move to approve item.
Are there any questions from the board?
To the chair.
Go ahead.
So, and I know you already said this, but I thought it'd be helpful to share with the board that our region is the only one that has not adopted. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Sure. With respect to urban flood control agencies in the Central Valley, there's 5 JPAs. One on the other side of the river, Three Rivers Levee Improvement Authority, Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency, West Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency, Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency, and the San Joaquin Area Flood Control Agency. Out of those 5 urban agencies, this is the only basin that, since the rescission of the Yuba City fee, that does not have a development impact fee for urban improvements. So that's it's a component of our funding that was there that is no longer there. But in fact, on the other side in Three Rivers, they just updated their fee, did the same thing down in San Joaquin area. So Sbfca and West Sac have had their fees in place for quite some time.
Move to approve.
Hold
Second.
on. For the question.
Why were these fees rescinded before there was a hand-in-glove mechanism in place to cover them? It seems like a strange course of events to me.
I turn that over to Michael.
Yeah, that's a good question, Charlie. So back in, I'm losing the time frames here.
It's
but I think
October
it was in
21 that
21 that we started
presented.
meeting. Yuba City wanted to, they were looking at their development impact fee package, all elements, parks, fire, police, levies, everything that was part of their development impact fee package, and they were trying to reduce it to spur on development. So they asked Sbfca to reevaluate the levy component fee in their package and see if we couldn't lower it. And that's when Seth's company came in and did an analysis and figured out, they weren't taking into account a lot of the revenues that Sbfca has generated since its formation, because their fee was established prior to Sbfca coming into being. So we drastically reduced that fee. But they said at that time, okay, we're going to rescind the levy fee until all the other members of Sbfca adopt it, essentially. They didn't want to be the only one. So they wanted it to be a regional fee, and they wanted all members to adopt that same fee. So that's why we're where we are. Well, go ahead, Seth.
So in terms of sorry to clarify. So the city rescinded the fee in June of 21. We came to the board with a draft rates in October 21, and then based on your direction, we started working with the member land use agencies, but then also updated our fee to be compliant with AB 602. So that was a little bit of time lag. We had prepared the fee rates without considering that legislation, so we needed to update it. But in terms of how it gets imposed, it's imposed as part of land use jurisdictions' police powers. So they're relying on their land use authority to impose this fee. And so the council or a board of a land use jurisdiction can adopt it by resolution or ordinance. They have the power to do that. And perhaps, Andrea, if I'm saying that wrong, but there is no public vote. It's just by resolution or ordinance.
That's correct. There is a public hearing required. Just to be clear, it's not Sbfca that is adopting the fee. It's each of the land use agencies. Sbfca doesn't have that power.
Right. We're approving the nexus study that essentially the land use jurisdictions would be reliant upon, and approving a collection agreement to work with them to collect that fee. And then based on that approval of the recommended resolution, we would work with the land use agencies to support their approval of the fee and adoption. So I can continue unless if the board is okay. Yep, the fee rates are I think on the next one or two slides. So essentially the fee-funded costs, when we look at the entire cost of our charge, the basis for the fee is $625 million of improvements needed to achieve, as I mentioned, ULOP in the north, 100-year in the south. The revenues that we have received or have budgeted within the fee-funded costs to offset that cost are $604 million. That reflects grant funding that we've received and have in place, as well as a cost share for expected future grants. We're advancing the Sutter Bypass East Levee project. We've made some assumptions about what the cost sharing might be on the implementation of that. We've also taken into consideration the fact that there's an assessment in place, and we've generated significant revenues and proceeds from the sale of bonds. So the net basis for the fee is $21 million. When you allocate that across the planned development, this is a summary of the acreage of planned development in each land use jurisdiction. When you allocate the cost across that projected amount of development in each of these areas, essentially it's a quotient, costs in the numerator, plan development in the denominator. This is the resulting fee rates. I presented them here as per 1,000 square foot, so it's a little bit easier to talk about, but a single family home would be paying approximately $428 per 1,000 square feet of development. That isn't as relevant to a lot of folks because they'd like to understand, well, what does it mean for a house? You can do the math, or I've presented a demonstrative calculation here for a 1,500 square foot home. Essentially, that'd be about $642 for a 1,500 square foot single family residential unit. Or in a multifamily, if it was an 800 square foot unit, it'd be $215 for that unit. Kept the per 1,000 square foot basis for commercial and industrial. The current Yuba City fee should be rescinded fee, but for that same 1,500 square foot home, you would have been paying about $4,000.
Seth, but this is only a one-time fee when they build it. They're not getting charged this year by year.
This is a one-time fee due typically at building permit final or prior to building permit final. You pull the application, you're agreeing to pay that fee before you can call for final inspection and get that building permit signed off. You got to satisfy all the fee obligations.
Thank you.
And that would be the same with any other development impact fee. So we're not within our collection agreement. It's up to the land use jurisdictions as to when they collect the fees. Some fees and programs I've worked on, we've talked about it before, site improvements, before you get that permit to do your mass grading or something. But in this economic environment, given the housing market, we would typically delay that as far as possible. So from a fee implementation process, once the board would approve the nexus study and delegate authority to the executive director to execute the fee collection agreement. We would work with the land use agencies to have them adopt the fee pursuant to the requirements of AB 602, that public hearing process. There's actually 2 public hearings, one for the approval of the nexus study and one for the approval of the fee itself. We'd work with them to implement that and work on the noticing processes. And then they would adopt the fee pursuant to Sbfca's nexus study, agree to collect it, and submit the revenues per the collection agreement to Sutter Butte to implement the projects identified in the nexus study. So this recaps the recommendation that I went through earlier, and I'm happy to answer any more questions or sit down if that's the pleasure.
Any more questions or comments from the board on this item? Yeah.
Maybe just one comment, that you have been to all the cities that were a part of this. Give them initial rundown, whether it be to the council or to the...
We've met with the staff of all of the member agencies, and for some of the jurisdictions, for Biggs, Gridley, we've made presentations to the councils. But we have met with staff of every agency at least once, some multiple times.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Any further questions? Okay, I'll bring it back to the board for action.
Move to approve.
I've got a motion by Director Connett
Second.
and a second by Director Morris. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against say nay. We have 1 nay and the rest are ayes. Motion passes. I would like the record to reflect that we were joined by Director Zigemeyer. Moving on to agenda item 9, presentation and file monthly financial report.
Okay. Should I just jump into it, Michael? Yep, okay. This is your regular monthly financial report. I'll go through this fairly quickly as typical. About 21.5 million estimated to date in terms of working capital. We received all of our operating revenues for 21-22 as reported. Nothing for 22-23 yet in terms of assessments. Those would typically be apportioned at the end of this month or early January. The capital revenues for 21-22, about 16.2 million, reflective of accruals. For fiscal year 22-23, almost 4 million to date in terms of accrued revenues. The total 6.7 is reflective of all these payments. There's quite a few in summary estate payments, about 6.7 million that we're waiting on, that we've either billed or we're looking for payments back. About 6.8 million in 21-22 assessments, including direct bills that are out there. From a expenditure perspective, for 21-22, we had about 7 million of expenses, and for 22-23, about 1.9 million through October 31st, as reflected in the report prepared by Sbfca and signed off by Yuba City. Our next debt service payment due in April 2023 is about 1.7 million combined. In terms of what we're working on, hardcore on closeout right now of our UFA agreement. We're submitting payments, pulling everything together and trying to get everything into the state for their December deadline, the end of this month. That's been a major focus. Continuing to also process reimbursements on some of our other grants through the Wildlife Conservation Board and CDFW. We've been continuing to support the administration of Frau Liefa's assessment approval, preparing that board agenda. They'll be working to consider the approval of a contract with an assessment engineering firm to administer the assessment at the meeting at 2 p.m. today. Obviously, the regional levy impact fee, we've been working on that as well. And with the board's approval of the resolution and collection agreement, we'll start trying to bring that forward to member land use agencies for consideration. And then continuing to coordinate with DWR on the Sutter Bypass East Levee project design, which a contract that Michael will go over in the program project update. And we've been advancing our audit for 21-22. The expectation is that we'll be presenting that to the board in February. So that's our monthly financial report. If there's any questions, happy to answer them at this time.
Any questions from the board?
Thank you.
Thank you. Number 10, presentation and final program project update.
Hey, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Michael Bissett here. So welcome to December. It's our last board meeting of the year. We've had a successful year, and I wanted to start out by highlighting what we anticipate for the coming year, some of the highlights of the activities that we're working on. Next slide, please. So here's kind of a summary of the big items that we're working on. We have other items that we're also working on, but I just wanted to focus on these. And in the next couple of slides, I'll get into more details. But the first bullet is the 3 new funding agreements from DWR. So we anticipate each of them coming in very soon, within the next couple days, weeks. The first one being that $4 million grant for Sutter Bypass East Levee project. And that one we should have very soon. I just talked to our program manager today. And that one will start kicking off. That project will kick off next year. The board authorized the HDR contract, so we'll be executing that and getting going on our design process. We have a $1.1 million grant from DWR for the OWA Robinson's Riffle project. So that's a planning study. We'll be meeting with all stakeholders early next year. We'll start setting up meetings, and we'll start defining the project, defining alternatives, and eventually selecting a preferred alternative to advance to a design stage. And then lastly is a $260,000 grant with DWR for the regional planning effort. And today the board authorized some task orders to advance that work. So as soon as we get that grant, we'll get going on that work. The next item is the Tudor Flood Risk Reduction Project. We kicked that off this year. We'll be in full design and permitting mode next year. We'll be setting up our pre-408 meeting with the Central Valley Board and the Army Corps, and then we'll get our application in and start that process. So I'll talk a little bit more about that project. As Seth indicated, we're closing out the Feather River West Levee project, getting all our last funding requests or reimbursement requests into DWR this month. We're closing out other aspects of the project in terms of environmental mitigation and real estate. So I'll talk about that briefly. We're advancing the Orville Wildlife Area project, the planning boat ramp. So what that is the planning study I just talked about, but we're also advancing a boat ramp repair and campground project in that Orville Wildlife Area. It's all 100% grant funded. We're working with CDFW and the Wildlife Conservation Board on funding for that project, and we anticipate receiving funding in early next year, and then we would start advancing the design process and environmental permitting. That project is right at the Thermalito Afterbay outlet. The next one is the perfecting federal credit and negotiating with Sbfca to sell that credit. We're working closely with the Army Corps on the perfection of the credit. So how much credit do we have? The state and Sbfca will have that credit. The state wants to move their credit over to the Sbfca project, and we would like to sell our credit to Sbfca. So that will be a big effort in next year. We talked about the regional development impact fee, so we'll take that to our member land use agencies, get on council agendas, board supervisor agendas next year, and hopefully complete that process. And then lastly on this slide is the submittal of the Sutter County FEMA remapping package. We've been working on that. We're still waiting for the Army Corps' as-built for their 5-mile project south of Star Bend, but as soon as we get that information, we'll be able to package it up, and then we'll be submitting a package into FEMA probably in the spring of next year. Next slide, please. So real briefly, this is the Feather River West Levee project. The 2nd Street project is a part of that. We've completed that veg removal and fence installation project. I think we've satisfied all the property owners out there for whatever last-minute requests we've had, and as far as I know, everybody's as happy as they're going to be with the project, and it looks great, and it's really going to comply with Army Corps standards going forward. So we're very happy about the outcome of that project. We're working with our environmental team and our cultural resources teams to finish up our mitigation aspects for the project, so that's still ongoing. The O&M manuals are soon to be approved by the Central Valley Board and issued to the local maintaining agency, so that will happen in early next month, early next year, I guess. And lastly is the right-of-way transfer. So we'll be transferring all the right-of-way that we've acquired along that 37-mile project. We'll be transferring those rights to the state of California. On Feather River West Levee Project 2, which is essentially the lower Feather River, what we're calling the Tudor Flood Risk Reduction Project, HDR is just submitted a 65% design submittal to our Director of Engineer, Chris Fritz, and that is under review. We've had meetings with the United Auburn Indian community to advance our AB 52 cultural resources consultation. So we had a good meeting earlier this week. So we're continuing that dialogue, and then we're advancing our environmental process for our CEQA document. Next slide, please. On the Sutter Bypass East Levee repairs, like I said, that $4 million grant is any day now. The board just approved the HDR contract, so we'll be kicking off that design process early next year and get that project underway. So we're very excited about that. We're also working with Sutter County to define, DWR was concerned about development inducement as a result of advancing repairs along the Sutter Bypass East Levee. We've since gotten over that hurdle. We're getting that $4 million funding, but the state is still wanting to have discussions with the county, and the county, on vice versa, wants to have those discussions with the state to put some language into the general plan to define where Sutter County is focusing their development focus, and it's not within our basin. It's pretty much south of there. So once we get some acknowledgement on both sides, we think that's really going to help open the door to advancing additional improvements along the Sutter Bypass. So that's going to be a real effort next year. On the OWA project, we're excited to advance that planning study and start setting up some focus group meetings with stakeholders, start putting out planning process alternatives on the table and start working through that process and end up with a defined alternative or a preferred alternative that we could advance. And that'll help trigger additional funding through either state or federal grant processes to keep that project moving forward. We're still looking at funding for sediment removal project. As the board's aware, we completed our, what we're calling phase 1 work with the grant we received from the Natural Resources Agency. We've identified a WCB grant that we think would be applicable to this project. We're submitting that grant later this month. And we'll keep our fingers crossed that we'll be successful there. We'll be doing some outreach to the WCB to educate them further on that project and the needs for it. So we're hopeful. Our existing permits are good until 2026, so we still have a couple of years to get funding in place, but that window could quickly be closing if we're not successful in 23. You know, we would still have 2024 and 25, but we want to get this work done as quickly as possible to benefit from a flood protection standpoint and a environmental standpoint. And then on our RFMP planning process, we're still advancing a lot of work through the phase 3 grant being administered by Trillia. Most notably the Cherokee Canal Corridor Management Plan. We've been having good dialogue with DWR They will be submitting to us next month, I believe, is what I just heard from the DWR project manager, their preliminary plan for that project. So we're looking forward to seeing that. And we're also advancing other efforts as identified here. One of the efforts Supervisor Connolly and I are working closely on is the Orville Dam Citizens Advisory Commission. And we'll be setting up a meeting with DWR next month to discuss concerns that we have. And we're having good dialogue with DWR, so we're looking forward to advancing those efforts. Next slide, please. All right, this is my last slide. Let's see, the federal project. So the federal project is essentially completed. There's still, well, they finished the punch list work now. So that work has been completed. We still are looking at closing out the project, receiving the as-built drawings, as I mentioned earlier, that we need for our FEMA remapping. Our federal crediting item, I had been quoting $27 million as the Sbfca share. It's gone up a little bit as we've submitted our last crediting package. So we're up to 28.9 million. So perhaps not all of that will be approved by the Corps, but that's kind of the range that we're in. So say it's 28 million or right around there. That's the number that we'd be looking to negotiate with Sbfca on. So that work is advancing, and those communications are advancing. So that's a good thing. So that when we're successful on a sale of that credit, that money will be utilized for advancing other projects here within our basin. I think I've talked about these last few items. So we do have a special board meeting right after this regular meeting. We had 2 items come to us very late this month. We weren't able to get them on the regular agenda. It was too late. We had already posted. And these are important items for a funding perspective. So we set up this special meeting right after this special board meeting. It shouldn't take very long. And it's been noticed for 1:30, so we're after 1:30, so we'll be able to do it at the conclusion of this regular meeting. And our next board meeting is in February of next year. So we typically take January off, so we won't come back together again until February. So I want to wish the entire board Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.
What day in February is that?
It's the second Wednesday.
So I'll be at World Ag Expo then. Yeah. Yes.
That's already scheduled.
Yes.
Yeah, it's always the second Wednesday of every month. So yeah, it'll be the February 8th.
Oh, okay. That'd be Calusa Farm Show.
So I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman, see if there's any questions about all this information I just presented on.
Thank you, Director. Do we have any questions or comments on agenda item number 10? Seeing, yes?
So not a question or a comment on either one of those items, but are we due for a board picture? Mr. Chair,
A picture?
It's been a while since we've had one.
Do we have to vote on that?
Okay.
We could do it after the special board meeting. We have time after.
Let's do it after the special board meeting. So, hearing no questions, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Okay. So this is, this regular meeting is adjourned. And we're going to go ahead and re-adjourn or open the next special meeting. Roll call, please.
Matt Conant,
Present.
Mike Ziegenmeyer,
Here.
Bruce Johnson,
Here.
Bill Conley,
Here.
Bo Shepherd, Sean Harris, Wade Kirchner, Charlie Hoppin, Drew Stresser, Lack Vergog,
Yes.
Mike Morris,
Here.
and Chris Schmidl.
Here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I didn't put these on a consent calendar, so we have to do each one of these individually. So item 1 is approval of resolutions 2022-18 and 2022-19. granting authority to the executive director to execute amendments to DWR funding agreements for our UFR project, which is the Urban Flood Risk Reduction Project, and also the Sutter Bypass East Levee Project. So we had gotten some language from Department of General Services that they wanted to see in these resolutions, specifically granting authority to executive director to sign off on or to submit for funding, sign off on contracts, sign off on amendments to contracts, that type of thing. So it's an all-inclusive resolution and delegation of authority. So we believe these two resolutions for both these individual projects will satisfy DWR and DGS concerns going forward. So with that said, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Second.
And I've got a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. The second item is on a similar nature. It's to authorize the executive director to submit a grant application and execute a funding agreement with California Wildlife Conservation Board for the Orville Wildlife Area Thermalito Afterbay Outlet Park and Recreation Project. So essentially the same thing. It allows, the state requires these resolutions by the public board to grant authority to either an executive director or someone else within the agency to execute those various documents. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you. See if there's questions.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Ayes have it. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.